Hello again, everybody. This is Mr. Everything, and I'm coming at you with another Wargaming in Miniature video. In this video, we're going to try to answer the age-old question, what makes a game better than another game? Okay, there are a lot of games out there, and I even asked some of my friends, some of my gaming partners, and my groupies, what makes a miniature game in general better than another miniature game? Got a lot of different responses. Things like ease versus complexity, cost, availability, space to play, is anyone else playing it, the feel of the game, how long it takes to play a game. But what I think it all boils down to, and this should be the answer to all games, a game is meant to be fun. If it's not fun, then why do you play it? Why do you bother? Okay, now we're talking about historical miniature games, but that's not necessarily true. This can apply to fantasy games as well. But my focus today is going to be on historical miniature games, and I'm not going to specify any specific genre or specific game. I don't want to single any game out. What I want to do is discuss in general terms, in broad terms, covering all the genres, why is a game better than another game in its own category? Because I understand why a game from like a Napoleonic period might be more fun for one person, where a game from the American Civil War might be more fun to another person. But those are unfair comparisons because they have a different feel, a different atmosphere. Everything should be different about these two genres. I want to start with availability. If a game is not available to all your players, if you can't find a copy for sale anywhere, and like you have the only copy, and it has a coffee stain on it, and you have to make photocopies and give to your players because you love that game, you might have a clue that it's not a good game. Because if it was a good game, it might still be in print. But on the other hand, the company might have just ran into some bad times and folded, but the game was an awesome game. So you have to weigh that and make a decision on your own if it really is a good game. But that is one point against it if it's not available, readily available to your players to purchase. Okay, something that I do consider is space to play. If a game takes a gymnasium floor to play, it's probably not a good game. It might be fun, and you might do it once at a convention, but that doesn't make it a good game. You need to be able to play it at home or at a local game store. If you're at a local game store that has space to play, just because you can push 3 tables together and make this massive battle doesn't make that a good game. You need to be able to play it at home with your friends, maybe at a game store, but only on 1 table or maybe 2 at the most. But if you have to push tables together to play a game, it takes too much space to play. There are some games out there that take up like 6 by 12. A 6 foot by 12 foot table is about the most you should be able to use as a playable area, but those are usually reserved for convention floors or big hobby nights with your gaming club. Does that make for a good game? I don't think so. It makes for a good like one-off, once in a while game, but not a game that you're going to want to play over and over and over. Another thing that might influence you to determine if it is a better game or a good game is the cost. If the book costs $150 or a starter set costs $199 and you get a couple armies and a rule book, is that better than paying $50 for a rule book and maybe building your own armies? Is a paperback better than a hardback? Is a book full of pictures better than one without any pictures? Is one with diagrams better? And you're looking at the cost of the booklet, the rule booklet. If, let's say, it's a rule set that has the basic rules, but you have to buy all these separate army books, and those books cost as much as the main rule book, and you wind up, now it's designed for you to be like, you build one army, and then your friend builds another army, and then another friend builds another army, and they only have to buy their army book. But you, because you want to be able to play with your friends and not force them to buy books, you buy multiple books, you have multiple armies, and it winds up costing you $200, $300, $400 just for rule booklets. Is that a good game? I don't think that's a good game. $40 to $50 for a rule book is about the price that you should be paying. And then maybe a campaign book. Sure, I get campaign books. You can have something like the Battle of the Bulge campaign, or Napoleonic battles in Spain, or something like that. Those are good campaign or supplemental rule booklets, but not required rule booklets. Cost comes into deciding if it is a good game. Now, not just the cost of the booklet. Now you need to decide the figurines, because remember, this is a miniature game, and if you have to buy miniatures, let's say it's a skirmish game, and the skirmish game only requires to have like 10 figures. That's a good cost. But if you are playing a mass battle game, like let's say Napoleon's Battles, and you have to have thousands of miniatures, that might be a little expensive. You might spend thousands of dollars on your army. Where a mid-range game, let's say Black Powder, you've got a couple of hundred models, and that makes your army. That might be your good game. Just remember that cost comes into consideration when trying to decide if it's a good game. Don't forget, you have to get terrain. You don't want to play with just a flat coffee table. You want to have hills and buildings and fences and hedges and wood lines and rivers and bridges. All that stuff factors into your cost. Some people have the luxury of playing at a game club, and the club has pitched in to buy certain pieces of terrain. But then again, cost should be a consideration for you to decide if it's a good game or if it's better than another game. Remember, some of these factors will come into play no matter which game is the better game. Like, I will play a Black Powder game and I will spend money on miniatures and terrain, but if I was to play another game like British Grenadier, I would still have to have terrain and I would still have to have figures, so that doesn't affect either way. But just keep that in the back of your mind. There is cost. So skirmish levels versus tactical levels versus strategic levels. Another very important aspect of is a game better than another game is, are there other players playing this game? Are you the only one? Do you play this game and you try to convince your friends to play, but no one else is playing this game? You look around the world, you go to conventions, no one's playing this game, just you. Does that make this a good game? I don't think so, because you want to play a miniature game with opponents. You want to play what's popular. But you don't want to play a game just because it's popular. So find the balance between, is it a good game, and are there other players playing it? If there are other players playing it, if it is a popular game, there's probably a reason. People are enjoying this game. That is usually what makes a good game. Another thing to consider is time to play the game. Do you have 3 days to play 2 turns? No, your time is valuable. When you set up the table and your friends come over and they start rolling dice and you move figures around, you want to be able to come to conclusion before they all have to leave and go home for the evening. So you need to have a game. Now, if you usually play on Saturdays and you allocate like an 8-hour period to play a miniature game, make sure you are playing a game that can be played in 8 hours or less. If you only have 4 hours because you play in the evenings, make sure you have a game that you're playing that takes 4 hours. In today's society, the way people are trending towards, shorter games tend to be more popular. So 2-hour games, 3-hour games. I was playing this one game, Blood Red Skies. It takes 30 minutes to play. That doesn't make it a better game. Just because it's a shorter amount of time doesn't make it a better game, but it does mean you can play more often, or you can play in different time slots. Whatever time's available for you, make sure that your game that you decide on can fit in that area. Now, a lot of my friends said the game should feel right. So this is very subjective. For a game to feel right, in my opinion, you have to be able to do certain things in the game that would be allowed or would have happened in an actual battle, and have the outcomes of those actions come out close to what you think would actually happen in reality. Because historical miniature games try to base their rules on what was possible in the time frame and what was historically accurate in the time frame. And if you do a cavalry charge on some peasants, should the peasants win every time? Probably not. Should the cavalry charge win every time? Maybe, but not always. That kind of stuff. And if it is lopsided one way or the other, well, it should be lopsided one way or the other, but if the results are accurate to what you feel should be possible, then it has a good feel to it. Also, if you're managing a battle as the player and your troops are maneuvering on the table the way you think they should be maneuvering on the table, and your opponent is doing his thing, and you get this enjoyment from seeing the battle unfold and maneuver, and shooting happens the way it's supposed to happen and things like this. That's the feel of the game, and that is really important. That is one of the strongest deciding factors on whether one game is better than the other, is does it feel right? And that's really just an opinion. Now, I have a note here that says, is it a simulator or is it an arcade game or something in between? And what I'm talking about there is it super hard to learn? Like, are there rules that incorporate every little minutia in the battle? Like, do I need to know how many laces the boot has? Do I need to know how many grains of powder the guy poured down his barrel? Do I need to know if his sword was sharpened that morning? Do I need to know that information? Or other minutia, like, is he behind a wooden fence? Is it a slat fence or is it a bar fence? Is it a hedge line? Is it a hedge line in the winter? Is it a hedge line in the summer? Is it overgrown? Is it vines? Is it mostly leaves? Do I need to know that kind of stuff? Do I need to know if it is a stone? Is it slate or is it brick? Do I need to know that? No. Some people believe that that's important, and they get more enjoyment, and they believe it's more fun when they know all the little minor details. Like, my general sneezed, so everybody gets a +1, or my general always has, he has a glass eye, so everything that happens on his left side is a -1. No, I don't need to know that. Those are things, that's flavor, good, flavor's good. It adds to the feel, but I don't need to know that. I don't need to know that I get a +1 because my laces are tied. I don't need to know that. That's too much minutia. And I consider those type of games simulators, or they're super overly complex. Overly complex. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, do I want a game that is so easy that I could teach someone how to play in 5 minutes? We can move some figures around. We could roll dice with no modifiers or very few modifiers. And then the charts are all exactly the same. It's either you win or you lose. And then, when you win, you after like 5 or 6 battles of you winning, you win the game. No, I don't want something that simple. I do want to have I want something in the middle. You want something that has enough complexity to give you the feel of the game, but you don't want it to be so complex that it ruins your enjoyment. Your fun level goes way down because you're constantly calculating modifiers and adding this versus that and trying to decide if, because it's a heavy cav, it gets a +1, and then the light cav, as long as they've got lances, they can do this or that. No, you don't need all those little minor modifications. I want to dispel an illusion that just because a game is easy doesn't make it less historically accurate than a game that has all the minutia. Just because I can tell you exactly how many rounds are in his cartridge bag doesn't mean it's more historical than another game that doesn't. Okay, so let me kind of break it down on what I look for when it comes to like minutia, simplicity, ease versus complexity. I'm going to give you an example. I'm trying not to use any rule system, but let's say that I have a unit of troops, and this unit has a bunch of different listings under it. Like he's well trained with his musket. That gives him a +1. And then he's got another listing. He's a regular troop. That gives him +0. And then he's got, they're carrying rifles. That gives him another +1. So he's already at +2, right? But they're well trained because they've had extra time being trained. That gives them a +3. And they have the troop, and they list all of these abilities. Rifles, well trained, regular, all that stuff, right? Scopes, give him another +1, let's just say. So he's got +3. And then, okay, so that's great. Now, you every time you want to fire that unit, you go, well, what does he have? Well, he's got scopes, and he's well trained, and he's regular. That doesn't give him a plus. But then he's got this, his line. But then he's got this rifled muskets or something. So basically, so we got a +3. Okay, roll your die, and they roll the die, and he adds to 3. Well, this is the kind of game I like. Why don't you have this unit, and next to it, it says shooting +3. It doesn't have to go into all the details. In the flavor text, or when you do your research on the unit, oh man, these guys were extremely well trained, and they had rifled muskets, and they're carrying scopes. Whatever, I'm just making stuff up. So you already know, like, wow, that's pretty cool. But in the mechanics of the game, it says that unit +3. So when I go to roll a die, I'm still rolling the same die. I'm still adding the same modifier, but I don't have the minutia to deal with looking at a chart and saying, well, he's got rifled muskets, so that gives him a +1. I don't care about that. Just give me the modifier. Same thing with like regular troops versus irregular troops. Do I need to know that they're irregular? What modifier does that give me? Unless it does something other than a die roll, then you need to know it. Well, do you have to just write it down on the bottom? Like, what does irregular troops do? Games that use the modifiers but don't break them down, they just give you the number. To me, it is going to be a lot faster on the table, making the game play faster, but you accomplish exactly the same thing. I had a gentleman comment to me about how one game was more historically accurate than another game? How do you know that one game is more historically accurate than another game? You're rolling dice. You weren't there. There were books you could read, but what makes a game more historically accurate? Do you have a musket that shoots 12 inches? And I have a musket that shoots 10 inches? Does that mean your game is more historically accurate because you can shoot 30 feet? Because how big is a model? You know, it's like over an inch, you know, so you're looking at like a 5 or 6 foot per inch, you know, so that doesn't make it accurate. The ground scale might be different. If my ground scale is 12 inches is 100 yards and your ground scale is 12 inches is 50 yards, does that make it more historically accurate? Just because you're rolling a D10 and I'm rolling 2D6, does that make it more historically accurate? What makes a game more historically accurate? Now, army lists, I can see that, where if you have 15 king tigers always, you know, in the desert, that doesn't make sense. That's not historically accurate. Right? I get that. But that's a scenario. That's a campaign book. That's not the rules. Don't blame the rules for what somebody wrote in a scenario. You know, you've got these T-34-85s at Normandy. Yeah, that's not historically accurate. Okay, I get that. But just saying that because I'm rolling a D10 and you're rolling a D6, that means my game's not historically accurate? Or just because you modify all your rolls because you're into minutia and I don't, but I still have a modifier and I still shoot, is that more historically accurate? No, that's not an argument that you can win. You can't win that kind of an argument. So here's some final thoughts. Most games, if not all games, have command. You have some kind of commanders somewhere. You know, World War II, you might have like battalion commanders or division commanders, whatever, squad leaders. You always have command. Why? I don't know. But you always have command. You always have movement. You got to be able to move the figures around the table. So you use a ruler of some kind, or not. There's some games that you just move until you get shot at or something. So I think what game was called Crossfire or something like that. But you always have movement. You always have shooting of some kind. It could be bows and arrows. It could be slings. It could be machine guns. It could be cannons. It could be whatever. You always have shooting. You almost always have some kind of close combat, melee, hand-to-hand. It's either the Romans with their swords or Germans with their bayonets or the dragon biting something. You always have melee. And then you almost always have morale, which will tell you whether or not a unit flees, breaks, runs, is routed. With those, and last but not least, you have victory conditions almost every time. And you have to decide if the game, you have to decide if the game you like has the right mixture of all of those. If it's fun, or if it has the right feel. So I don't want to play the Battle of Agincourt if all I'm concerned about is command and control. It doesn't feel right. I don't want to play the Battle of the Bulge if all I'm concerned about is hand-to-hand. I mean, of course, there's going to be some hand-to-hand, but there should be shooting. There should be rifles, M1s, Kar 98s, MG42s. There should be shooting. So you have to get the right amount of feel from every game, but every one of them is going to have command and control somehow, morale and routing, all that good stuff, victory conditions, but you're going to have movement of some kind. There's going to be some kind of inches of movement. There's going to be terrain. You got to figure out the terrain rules. Are you in a building, behind a hedge, behind a wall, whatever? That's in every game. But for you to decide if it is a good game, you got to take everything that I spoke about today into consideration and determine if it's a good game. I can't answer that for you. I've been around a while. I've been around the block a while. I've played hundreds of miniature games. Hundreds of different rules. I've come to the conclusion that it's most important if the game is fun to play. If you and your friends are rolling dice, moving figures, miniatures are coming off the table, you're laughing, you're drinking a beer, you're having a good time, everybody's enjoying themselves, that's the sign of a good game. And that should be all that's important. As long as you and your friends are having fun, you found a good game, that means you're playing it, you've got miniatures for it, you've got terrain, you've got people playing it with you, and that's all you can ask for. All right, guys, thanks for coming out and checking out this video. If you have any comments about what you think is a good game, be sure to put that in to the comments below. I do read all those, and I'm interested to hear what you guys have to say. And I'll catch you next time.